Few people truly know Nathaniel Hayes, despite the fact that everyone admires him. Even though he is a wealthy and powerful billionaire, he has an empty heart. He is reticent and avoids real ties because of a tragedy in his life. However, he chooses to assist two twin girls who are in a state of despair after seeing them one rainy night. He finds something that would not only transform his life, but also fill the voids in his heart as a result of the unselfish act. But after leaving them safely, he receives a mystery message when he gets home, which leads him to wonder what's going on and starts a journey filled with sensitivity, emotion, and revelations. Tell me which city you're watching from before we continue. I'm curious about the progress made on this video. In order for me to deliver you fascinating stories like this one every day, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. As Nathaniel Hayes drove through the congested streets of New York, raindrops trickled down the car's windows. The storm appeared to be the ideal metaphor for his mental condition. Even with his wealth and power, he was unable to shake the nagging sense of isolation. Although his business was doing well, he was aware that something was lacking in his life, a gap that could not be filled by even the greatest success. He noticed something as he rounded a corner. Two tiny figures were seated on the pavement, embracing, their shoulders trembling with cold, in the wavering light of a street lamp. Nathaniel reduced speed and brought the vehicle to a stop. As soon as he stepped outside, the rain and freezing wind attacked him, soaking his coat. He walked over to the kids and saw that they were twin girls, dressed in flimsy clothing that did not keep the weather out. Their faces were obviously soaked from the tears that were still streaming down, in addition to the rain. Trying not to come across as overly concerned, he inquired, "Are you all right?" As they gazed up at him, the most courageous of the girls whispered, "We have nowhere to go." Nathaniel's heart constricted. He was aware that he couldn't abandon them. "Come on with me. Let's leave this rain behind." Despite their hesitancy, the kids eventually agreed, since they were too tired and cold. In an attempt to warm them up as he drove to his mansion, he'd assisted them into the car and turned on the warmth. He attempted to talk to the females along the way, but they were reticent. He told them his name was Nathaniel and that he was there to help them. Gradually, they relaxed enough to reveal their names, Emily and Grace. Despite their short answers, he realized there was much more to their story than they were willing to tell. When they arrived at the mansion, Nathaniel ordered Margaret, his longtime housekeeper, to take care of the girls. "Give them a bath, Margaret. Find something comfortable for them to wear, then prepare something hot to eat." Margaret, always attentive, nodded immediately and took the children inside. Nathaniel watched them disappear down the corridor, his heart still tight. There was something special about them, something he couldn't explain. Later, while the girls were sleeping in one of the guest rooms, Nathaniel went to check on them. He stood in the doorway, watching them rest. Emily and Grace were hugging each other as if they needed each other's closeness to feel safe. Margaret, who was in the hallway, commented in a low voice, "They're so small, Mr. Hayes, and so grateful. They say you're a hero." He smiled slightly but felt a mixture of emotions he didn't know how to process. "They seem to have been through a lot. I want us to talk to them tomorrow. Try to find out more about where they came from." After leaving the girls safely, Nathaniel slept. Early the next morning, he left to deal with an important work matter but promised himself he wouldn't be long. Hours later, the sunny afternoon seemed an absolute contrast to Nathaniel Hayes' confused feelings. He left the office early, thinking about the future of the girls he had met. All morning, his mind had been restless. Despite everything he had already faced in life, something about Emily and Grace stirred deep within him, as if fate had placed him at that crossroads the night before for a reason he still didn't understand. Arriving at his mansion, he got out of the car with quick steps. He expected to find the girls playing in the garden or in the living room with Margaret. But as soon as he entered the front door, he was greeted by an unexpected silence. There was no sound of children's laughter or the usual clatter of housework. The house seemed strangely quiet. "Margaret?" Nathaniel called out, his voice echoing faintly through the corridors. He looked around, frowning. "Emily? Grace?" Without an answer, he began checking the nearby rooms, first the living room, then the dining room, but both were empty. He climbed the stairs with steady steps, his heart starting to beat faster. Perhaps they were resting in the bedroom. He made his way there, carefully pushing open the door. The room was tidy and lit by the sunlight coming in through the window, but the bed was empty. Then he saw the note on the pillow. His heart raced as he quickly picked it up. The handwriting was simple but delicate, as if one of the girls had written it. "Thank you for looking after us. We need to tell you something." Nathaniel read and reread the note, trying to understand. What did it mean? He looked around for any other sign of where they might be, but the room was spotless. He went to the closet, which was empty, indicating that none of the girls' belongings were there. Restlessness began to grow. He folded the note carefully and left the room, calling out again. "Margaret? Grace? Emily? Where are you?" This time his voice carried a tone of urgency. He went downstairs quickly, checking the kitchen and the other rooms on the second floor. The house, usually so full of life, seemed strangely deserted. There was no sign of the girls or Margaret. He went to the back garden, but found nothing there either. Only the sound of a light wind blowing through the trees filled the air. Nathaniel went back inside, running his hands through his hair, now clearly worried. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, something unusual for him. Where could they have gone? Why hadn't Margaret told him? And what exactly did the girls want to tell him? The note sounded like a promise, but also like an enigma. With the note still in his hand, he stood in the entrance hall trying to organize his thoughts. Something didn't make sense, but he felt he was about to find out. Nathaniel stood in the entrance hall, still holding the note. The silence of the mansion intensified his discomfort. It was then that he heard something coming from outside, a sound that, for a moment, he thought he had imagined. Laughter. Light, childish laughter broke the atmosphere of tension that had set in. He followed the sound, moved by a mixture of relief and curiosity, and opened the door leading to the garden. The scene he found outside made his heart stop for an instant. Margaret was sitting on the lawn, a smile on her lips, while Emily and Grace ran around laughing and picking flowers from a small bed nearby. A basket next to Margaret was already full of colorful flowers, and the girls looked genuinely happy, as if all the pain from the night before was just a distant memory. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching them in silence. There was something magical about that moment. The mansion, which for so long had been just a cold, empty space, now seemed full of life. The sound of laughter filled every corner, something he hadn't heard for many years since his own family had left. An unexpected warmth began to spread through his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. Grace saw him first. Her eyes sparkled, and she pulled Emily by the hand, pointing at him. The two of them ran toward him, with Margaret following close behind, carrying the basket full of flowers. When the girls arrived, they held out their small hands and handed him a makeshift bouquet. "It's for you," said Grace, smiling shyly. Emily added, "So thank you for saving us yesterday." Nathaniel looked at the bouquet for a moment, surprised before accepting it. His chest tightened, almost painfully. He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him something like this without expecting anything in return. He hadn't felt so loved in years. Since losing his wife and son, his life had been a succession of empty days and lonely nights. The world seemed to have forgotten that he existed beyond the title of business tycoon. But here were these two children, offering him flowers as if he were the most important person in the world. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice slightly choked. "You don't know how much this means to me." The girls smiled, but Nathaniel noticed something else in their expressions, something unsaved. He bent down to their height and asked softly, "You left that note in the bedroom, didn't you? You said you needed to tell me something. What is it?" Emily's smile disappeared immediately. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Grace. Grace, for her part, looked nervous, biting her lip and holding her sister's hand tightly. Finally, Emily couldn't hold it in any longer. She started crying and threw herself into Grace's arms. The two hugged each other tightly, and Nathaniel's heart squeezed. He didn't know what was so painful that it made them react like this, but he knew he couldn't force them. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It's okay," he said in a gentle tone as he ran his hand through their hair. "You don't have to tell me now if you don't want to. But I want you to know that I'm here to help. Whatever it is, I need to know so I can make the right decision and take you to a place where you'll be safe." The girls still looked tense, but Nathaniel saw Grace nod slightly. He stood up and looked at Margaret, who seemed as worried as he was. "Let's give them some time," Nathaniel said, more to himself than to anyone else. "For now, take them to have a shower and something to eat. After that, I want them to come back here. We need to talk." Margaret took the girls' hands and led them back inside, while Nathaniel remained in the garden, staring at the bouquet in his hands. His mind was racing. He felt that whatever the girls needed to tell him carried a lot of emotional weight, something they were afraid to reveal. He also sensed that, somehow, his own life was deeply connected to what they were hiding. What were those children keeping? And why did it seem so important to them? And now to him? The mansion was different, full of life, but the weight of the mystery still hung over him like a shadow. He knew he would need all his patience to wait for answers. Nathaniel was sitting in his favorite armchair in the living room, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace. The cozy warmth seemed in stark contrast to the heaviness he felt in his chest. He glanced at his watch. It wouldn't be long before Margaret brought the girls in for the talk he knew he needed to have. The note and their behavior weighed on his mind like a riddle. Who were Emily and Grace, really? And why did this mystery seem so urgent? When Margaret's footsteps echoed in the hallway, he stood up instinctively, straightening his jacket. The girls entered, still shy, their hair damp from the bath. They were wearing clean clothes that seemed too big for their slim bodies, but there was something in their expressions that worried him. Although they had smiled a few hours earlier, now they seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. They stopped near the sofa, exchanging nervous glances. Margaret put a hand on each of their shoulders, encouraging them to sit down. Nathaniel lowered himself to their height and tried to ease the tension with a gentle smile. His voice came out calm but full of sincerity. Emily, Grace, I know you've been through a lot, but you're in a safe place now. You can tell me everything. I need to understand what happened so I can help you. The two girls were silent for a moment, exchanging glances again. Emily clasped her hands in her lap, her little fingers trembling slightly. It was Grace who spoke first, her voice so low that Nathaniel had to lean in to hear. We didn't want to bother you, but we had nowhere else to go. Emily began to cry silently, hiding her face in her hands. Nathaniel felt a lump in his throat. He held her little hands, trying to convey comfort. You're not a bother. You're important. I want you to tell me everything, but in your own time, okay? Grace swallowed, fighting back tears. Finally, she began to speak, hesitantly but determinedly. We lived in a place, an orphanage. The words seemed to hang heavy in the air as if they carried years of suffering. Nathaniel didn't interrupt, letting her continue. Our father and mother, yeah, they left us there. Grace's voice broke, and she paused to take a deep breath. They were good, sometimes, but they drank a lot, and they fought a lot. Emily finally lifted her face, her eyes swollen from crying, and finished with a strain in her voice. They left us alone, always. We'd get hungry cold, and sometimes they forgot to come back. Grace squeezed her sister's hand as if seeking the strength to continue. One day, they took us to that place, the orphanage. They said they were going to come back for us, but they never did. Never. The word never came out almost as a desperate whisper, and Nathaniel felt a sharp pain in his chest as he imagined two young children waiting in vain for their parents. He clenched his fists to contain the anger he felt toward those who should have protected them, but he kept his focus on listening. Emily continued, still sobbing. It wasn't good. The people who looked after it weren't like you. Grace nodded, her expression hardening at the memory. They didn't love us. They didn't let us play or study. We just tidied the house and washed clothes. Everything for everyone. Emily interrupted, her voice desperate. They said we were a burden, that no one would want us. Tears cascaded down both of their faces, and Nathaniel felt the weight of their words like a stone crushing his heart. He reached out and wiped away Emily's tears with a gentle gesture. You are not a burden. You never were. Grace took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together, but her voice still trembled as she continued. We were trying to hold on, but then we heard them saying that they were going to separate us. Nathaniel frowned. Separate you? Grace nodded, her eyes full of pain. They said that only I would be adopted, that Emily would stay there. Emily sobbed loudly this time, unable to hold back the pain she felt. They were going to take my sister away from me, the only person I have in the world. Nathaniel took a deep breath, fighting the emotion growing inside him. He didn't know what to say. Grace continued, more forcefully now, as if to make it clear what they were up against. So we ran away. We waited for night to come and left. We were scared, but we'd rather stay together on the street than be separated there. Emily looked at him, her eyes watery but full of hope. That's how we found you. The silence that followed was as heavy as their words. Nathaniel looked at those two children, so small, so marked by pain, and felt something inside him change. He knew he had to do something. Not just to resolve the situation, but to give them what they had never had, a chance to be loved and protected. He took a deep breath, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. You're very brave, you know that. You did what you could to be together, and that's incredible. The girls smiled shyly through their tears, but there was still a heaviness in the air. Nathaniel knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He stood up, placing his hands on their shoulders, firmly but tenderly. Now, I need you to trust me. I'll do everything I can to help. But to do that, I need to understand more about this place where you were. Grace hesitated, looking at Emily. Finally, she nodded. But for now, I want you to rest, or go and play. Then we'll come back here and continue this conversation, okay? Emily hugged her sister, and Grace returned the gesture. They both looked exhausted but willing to trust Nathaniel. Margaret went inside and led the girls back upstairs, while Nathaniel remained in the living room, staring at the flames in the fireplace. His mind was racing. He had to act. He couldn't allow those girls to be returned to such a cruel place, let alone be separated. But what could he do? He had no idea how to handle such a delicate situation, but he knew he couldn't fail them. Still holding the note he had found hours before, he looked into the fire and decided. He would do whatever it took to ensure that Emily and Grace had the future they deserved. The only question was how. Nathaniel sat in the armchair for several minutes after the girls left, staring at the flames as he tried to digest everything he had just heard. Their story was a succession of pain, losses, and injustices he could barely imagine. Two children, so small, so fragile, had faced the kind of abandonment and cruelty he couldn't comprehend. He felt a heaviness in his chest, a mixture of deep sadness and indignation. Why had fate crossed their paths? Why him? Why now? He didn't believe in coincidences. Something inside him told him there was a bigger reason for all of this. Margaret quietly entered the room and approached, noticing Nathaniel's distant and troubled expression. She sat down next to him and offered him a cup of tea, which he accepted automatically, without taking his eyes off the fire. Mr. Hayes, Margaret began, her voice soft. These girls, they've been through so much, haven't they? I've never seen children so marked by pain. Nathaniel nodded slowly, still lost in thought. They didn't deserve it, Margaret. No child does. Margaret also looked into the flames, sighing deeply. What now? What are you going to do? Nathaniel turned to her, his expression hardening as he decided on the next step. I'm going to find a solution. I won't let them go back to that place, that's for sure. But I need help. I'll call Carter. He'll know how to proceed. Carter was his trusted lawyer, a practical and efficient man who had been handling all of Nathaniel's legal matters for years. If there was a solution within the law, Carter would find it. He picked up the phone and made the call, asking the lawyer to come immediately to the mansion. While they waited, Margaret remained by his side, silent, but with a comforting presence. She knew that Nathaniel had his heart in the right place, but she also knew how much this situation weighed on him. Ever since she had met him, he had always been a reserved man, but she could see the way Emily and Grace had touched something deep inside him, something he perhaps didn't even know still existed. Carter arrived about an hour later, carrying his briefcase and his usual serious expression. They sat down in the living room, and Nathaniel explained everything, from how he had found the girls to what they had told him about the orphanage and the abuse they had suffered. Carter listened attentively, making some notes on a notepad. When Nathaniel had finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair, reflecting for a moment before answering. Well, Mr. Hayes, the situation is complicated. Carter cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. As you know, custody of these children legally belongs to the orphanage. They are responsible for them, and any decision about their future must go through them. Nathaniel frowned, his frustration beginning to grow. And how can they remain responsible after everything they've done? They were being abused, Carter. There's no way that can be allowed. The lawyer raised his hand in a conciliatory gesture. I understand your indignation, and I can assure you that we will take the necessary steps to report this to the competent authorities. But for the moment, you need to deal directly with the orphanage. I advise you to go there, talk to the person in charge, and resolve the situation formally. Nathaniel snorted, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. What if they refuse to cooperate? In that case, we could file a lawsuit to have the girls removed permanently. But these things take time, and there are no guarantees. While the two of them were talking, Nathaniel noticed a discreet movement in the corridor. He turned and saw Emily and Grace peeking out from behind the ajar door. The look on their faces was pure fear. He knew immediately that they had heard enough to understand the seriousness of the situation. The girls quickly backed away when they realized Nathaniel had seen them, but he had already gotten up. "Excuse me, Carter. I need to sort something out." He walked down the corridor, meeting the two girls by the stairs. Grace was holding Emily's hand tightly, and they both looked tense, as if they were preparing to hear the worst. Nathaniel knelt down in front of them, trying to soften his expression so as not to frighten them even more. "You hurt, didn't you?" Emily started crying immediately, while Grace struggled to look brave, but couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. "Are you going to take us back there?" She had brown hair tied up in a simple bun and a young but tired face, as if she carried the weight of many internal battles. Her expression was determined, but her eyes showed deep sadness. "Mrs. Parker, I need to talk to you," the woman said, completely ignoring the presence of Nathaniel and Carter. Parker sighed, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Now is not a good time, Olivia. I'm with visitors." "I don't care," Olivia replied, crossing her arms. "I came to tell you that I'm leaving. I can't work here anymore." The tension in the room increased instantly. Nathaniel and Carter exchanged a quick glance, listening to every word. Parker looked uncomfortable but tried to keep her composure. "Olivia, this is highly inappropriate. Please don't make a scene." "A scene?" Olivia's voice rose, charged with indignation. "What's inappropriate is what happens here day after day. I won't stand for it. I'm leaving, and nothing is going to change my mind." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, analyzing every detail. Parker tried to disguise it, but she was clearly irritated by the exposure. "You don't know what you're talking about," Parker replied in a sharp tone, but still tried to sound controlled. "We need committed people, Olivia, not unnecessary drama." "Then find someone else to cover up your shortcomings," Olivia retorted. "I've already endured a whole year here. I can't do this to myself or the children anymore." Before Parker could reply, Olivia left the room, slamming the door behind her. Nathaniel waited a moment, pretending to ignore the confrontation, before standing up politely. "Mrs. Parker, thank you for your time. I'll think about the process and get back to you." Parker forced a smile, clearly anxious for him to leave. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. I'll be happy to help." Outside, Nathaniel and Carter spotted Olivia hurrying toward the parking lot. Nathaniel quickened his pace to catch up with her. "Excuse me, miss," he called out. Olivia stopped, turning around with a confused expression. "Who are you?" she asked without hiding her suspicion. "Nathaniel Hayes. I was talking to the principal when I heard you arguing. Can I talk to you for a moment?" Olivia hesitated, but something in Nathaniel's expression seemed sincere. Finally, she nodded. "What do you want to know?" "The truth," he answered bluntly. "What really happens in this orphanage?" Olivia let out a tired sigh, crossing her arms again. "It's not a home. The children aren't cared for or loved. They are exploited. They spend more time cleaning and working than being children." Nathaniel felt his blood boil but kept his tone calm. "And the twins? Emily and Grace? You know them?" Olivia's eyes instantly filled with tears. She put her hand to her mouth, struggling to control her emotions. "Yes, I know them. They were everything to me in there. I stayed in that place much longer than I should have because I was afraid to leave them alone." Nathaniel felt a tightness in his chest when he heard this. There was something genuine and deep in Olivia's love for those girls. "They're with me now," he said, lowering his voice. "They're safe." Olivia began to cry with relief, covering her face with her hands. Nathaniel stepped forward, lightly touching her shoulder. "Come with me. I want you to see them." She nodded without hesitation. When they arrived at the mansion, Nathaniel asked Olivia to wait in the living room while he called the girls. Emily and Grace were in the bedroom, shyly playing with some new toys that Margaret had gotten for them. When Nathaniel entered, they both ran up to him and hugged him. "I want to show you something," he said, smiling. The girls followed him, curious. When they reached the living room, Olivia was standing there, nervous but hopeful. When Emily and Grace saw her, they stopped abruptly, their eyes wide. "Olivia!" they shouted in unison, running to her. Olivia fell to her knees, hugging them tightly as tears streamed down her face. "My little ones, I've missed you so much." Nathaniel watched the scene, feeling something he couldn't explain. It was as if his home was finally complete, as if everything in that moment had a purpose. He realized right then and there that he would do anything to adopt those girls, no matter what they had to face. They deserved a home. and he would be that home. Nathaniel couldn't stop thinking about the scene he had witnessed the night before. Emily and Grace running into Olivia's arms as if the simple fact of having her clothes was enough to heal all the wounds they carried. Their smiles, their eyes shining with genuine joy, something he hadn't seen since meeting them, warmed his heart in a way he hadn't known possible. He had never had children, had never experienced the unconditional love of a child. But at that moment, he felt as if he had found something that had always been missing in his life. The next morning, Nathaniel called Margaret into the living room. She entered with her usual calmness and gentleness, but as soon as she saw his expression, she realized that something important was about to be said. "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you," he began, running a hand through his hair nervously. "I've made a decision. I want to adopt Emily and Grace." Margaret's face lit up instantly. She let out a little cry of joy and, without thinking, hugged Nathaniel tightly. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, this is wonderful," she exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "These girls, they already consider you their family, and with all due respect, I think you need them as much as they need you." Nathaniel smiled, touched by the sincerity of Margaret's words. He knew she was right. The girls had filled a void in his life that he hadn't even known existed. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to need your help as always. I can't do this alone." Margaret nodded resolutely. "I'm here for you, sir. I always have been." Nathaniel called Carter and Olivia to a meeting that same afternoon. Carter arrived on time as usual, his briefcase full of documents, while Olivia seemed a little nervous. It was clear that Nathaniel's presence still made her a little uncomfortable, but her dedication to the girls was unquestionable. "Well, we have a lot to discuss," Carter began, adjusting his glasses. "If Mr. Hayes really wants to go ahead with the adoption, we'll need to take some immediate steps." Nathaniel nodded, leaning his elbows on the table. "I want to do everything within the law. I don't want anything to threaten the future of these girls." Olivia, who was sitting next to him, leaned in slightly. "I want to help too. I can't work in that orphanage anymore, but I'm not going to abandon Emily and Grace. They mean a lot to me." Nathaniel gave her a warm look, recognizing the depth of Olivia's love for the girls. "That's why you're here, Olivia. Your help will be invaluable." During the meeting, Carter explained the steps needed to start the adoption process. It was a long road full of red tape, but Nathaniel was determined to face it. They also discussed what to do about the orphanage. Olivia told him more details about the mistreatment she had witnessed, and Carter assured her that he would file a formal complaint with the authorities. It was during this process that they discovered a detail that explained why Emily and Grace's parents had never returned to pick them up. After investigating the orphanage's records and consulting public archives, Carter revealed that their parents had died in a car accident shortly after leaving the girls. This discovery brought a mixture of sadness and relief. On one hand, it explained the abandonment. On the other, it meant that there was no one who could contest the adoption. Nathaniel shared the news with Margaret that evening, and they both regretted the tragedy the girls had faced. He decided not to tell them immediately. He didn't want to relive the pain of abandonment, especially now that they were beginning to feel safe and happy. As the legal process progressed, Carter managed to get Mrs. Parker removed from running the orphanage. Olivia's complaints, supported by the testimonies of others, were enough for the authorities to intervene. Nathaniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, knowing that other children would no longer suffer at the hands of that woman. In the meantime, Olivia began visiting Nathaniel's house more regularly. At first, her visits were to see Emily and Grace, but over time, they became something more. She brought simple gifts for the girls, books, games, and organized outings to the park or the zoo. Nathaniel observed these moments with admiration. Olivia had a way of turning even the simplest days into something special for the girls. The once cold and empty house was now full of laughter and joy. Emily and Grace ran around the corridors, played in the garden, and filled the rooms with life. Margaret seemed livelier than ever, always preparing snacks and looking after everyone as if they were one big family. It was during this time that Nathaniel realized something that would change everything. He began to look at Olivia differently. At first, it was subtle, the way she smiled when she heard one of Grace's funny stories, or the way her face lit up when Emily ran to hug her. Then it became more obvious. He found himself thinking about her when he was alone, wondering what she was doing or what it would be like to have her there permanently. One day, during a picnic in the garden with the girls, Nathaniel noticed that Olivia looked more beautiful than ever. She wore a simple dress, but her eyes shone with a light he couldn't ignore. As she laughed at something Emily had said, Nathaniel felt a wave of warmth invade his chest. He realized that he always looked forward to her visits, and when she left, the house seemed to lose some of its magic. It wasn't just because of the girls, it was her. Olivia had brought a new dimension to his life, something he hadn't known was missing until she came along. Nathaniel knew he was falling in love, but there were doubts, fears, and a sense of vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years. He had built his life around emotional barriers, and now they all seemed to be crumbling. As he watched Olivia playing with the girls that day, laughing and running around the garden, Nathaniel made another decision. He knew he needed to be honest with himself, and eventually with her. But for now, his focus was on ensuring that Emily and Grace had a secure and happy future. If fate had crossed their paths, he would trust time to guide him. That night, while the girls slept, Nathaniel stood on the balcony, looking up at the starry sky. Margaret joined him, bringing a cup of tea. "You look different lately," she commented with a smile. Nathaniel laughed, shaking his head. "I think these girls have changed my life, Margaret." She nodded, but her gaze was shrewd. "And maybe it's not just the girls, is it?" Nathaniel didn't answer, but his smile delivered what words didn't need to say. The days at the Hayes mansion became a celebration of life. Emily and Grace, who had once lived in fear and sadness, were now children full of joy, exploring every corner of the house and laughing like never before. Olivia's constant presence brought even more light into the home. She had become an essential figure for the girls, almost like a second mother, always attentive and full of love. Margaret, who watched everything closely, knew that something special was unfolding, not only in the girls' lives but also in Nathaniel's heart. The adoption process was almost complete. Nathaniel had spent weeks attending meetings, hearings, and filling out all the necessary paperwork. Carter ensured that everything was resolved quickly and without hindrance. The truth about what was going on in the orphanage, coupled with Mrs. Parker's definitive removal, helped strengthen Nathaniel's case. The news of the adoption's official approval arrived one sunny morning via phone call from Carter. "Mr. Hayes, congratulations. You are now officially Emily and Grace's father." Nathaniel needed a moment to process. The emotional weight of those words was overwhelming, but in a wonderful way. He thanked Carter and hung up, his eyes watering. Margaret entered the room and, seeing the look on Nathaniel's face, understood immediately. "It worked, didn't it?" she asked, smiling from ear to ear. Nathaniel nodded, thrilled. "They are officially my daughters now." Margaret shouted with joy, clapped her hands, and ran to tell the girls. Nathaniel heard the sound of laughter and excited shouts coming from upstairs as Grace and Emily celebrated the news with tight hugs for Margaret. He went upstairs and was greeted by the two girls, who threw themselves into his arms. "Are we really your family now?" Emily asked, her eyes shining. Nathaniel stroked her hair, feeling the weight of unconditional love. "You've always been my family. We've only made it official now." That evening, he organized a party in the garden of the mansion. Hanging lights glowed softly between the trees, soft music filled the air, and there was a table full of the girls' favorite foods. Olivia arrived later, and Nathaniel's heart raced at the sight of her. She was wearing a simple blue dress, but to him, she looked more stunning than ever. "Congratulations, Nathaniel," she said as she approached. "You deserve all the happiness these girls have brought you." He held her gaze for a moment, feeling an almost irresistible urge to say everything he was holding in his heart. But it wasn't the moment, at least not yet. During the party, Nathaniel noticed how Olivia interacted with the girls. She had a unique way of understanding their needs, of bringing joy and comfort with an ease he had never seen before. He also realized that Emily and Grace not only adored her but considered her part of the family. At the end of the evening, when everyone was more relaxed, Grace pulled Olivia by the hand. "Are you going to stay here with us forever?" Olivia looked at Nathaniel, visibly surprised by the question. He felt a chill as he realized what the girls were trying to do. "Well, I'll always be around," Olivia replied with a smile, trying to deflect the question. Emily frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. "Oh, we want you to live here. You and Dad are a good match." The word daddy hit Nathaniel like an avalanche. He was still getting used to the title, but hearing it come out of Emily's mouth while including Olivia in the equation made something in his chest change. He laughed half-heartedly as Olivia blushed intensely. After the girls had been put to bed, Nathaniel and Olivia stayed in the garden, illuminated by the soft light of the moon and the candles that still glowed on the table. He finally found the courage he had been building up for weeks. Olivia, I want to tell you something. She turned to him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. What is it? Nathaniel took a deep breath. Since you came into our lives, everything has changed. It wasn't just about the girls. It was about what you brought to me. I never thought I'd be able to open up to someone again, but you've shown me that it's possible. Olivia seemed paralyzed, her eyes shining with surprise and emotion. Nathaniel stepped forward, gently holding her hands. I've fallen in love with you, Olivia. I want you to stay, not just as someone who visits the girls, but as part of our family. She began to cry, covering her face with her hands. Nathaniel felt his heart squeeze, thinking that perhaps he had made a mistake. But before he could say anything, Olivia hugged him tightly. I love you too, Nathaniel. I always have. They kissed under the starlight, with the soft sound of the wind around them. It was a moment that changed everything. Over the next few months, the Hayes mansion became a real home. Nathaniel and Olivia began to plan a future together while raising Emily and Grace as a family. The girls blossomed more every day, confident and sure that they finally belonged in a place where they were loved unconditionally. Nathaniel, who had previously believed that his life was destined for loneliness, now saw the world in a completely different way. Not only had he found a family, but he had also found himself in the process. On Emily and Grace's birthday, Nathaniel organized a big celebration in the garden, inviting friends and important people in their lives. During the party, he made an unexpected announcement. Today is not just my daughter's birthday, he said, holding Olivia's hands. It's the day I want to make something even more special official. He knelt down in front of Olivia, taking a small ring out of his pocket. The girls started screaming with joy while everyone around applauded. Olivia, you have brought light into my life and into the lives of my daughters. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she nodded quickly. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Nathaniel kissed her to applause and laughter, while Emily and Grace ran to embrace them. That was the day when everything finally fell into place, the day when all the missing pieces of their lives formed a perfect picture of love, overcoming, and togetherness. The Hayes mansion, once dark and empty, was now a home full of laughter, memories, a happiness that no one there had ever thought possible. If you like this story and want to see more like it, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't miss the video that's appearing on your screen right now. Click to continue following stories that will move you.